When I first started out in interactive design, I used mostly Adobe products, Illustrator, and Photoshop to do web mockups and things like that. But as times have changed, the tools have gotten better. Tools like Sketch and XD by Adobe are better suited for working with apps and other interactive experiences. Lately, the tool that I've been using the most is Figma. To get started with Figma, you can download a free version if you're a student or an educator. The website figma.com/education will get you set up for that. You just need to get verified with your .edu email address. And from there, it's pretty straightforward. The great thing is you can start using this tool for free. You can use Figma in a web browser, but I'm actually going to use the desktop app. Here I am in my app. I'm going to start by creating a new file. One thing that you want to be aware of is that there's a traditional Figma file, which you'll probably see here, which says new design file. And there's also something called FigJam, which is Figma's whiteboarding and diagramming tool. Both are really nice to use. I'm going to use the design file, but it might cause some confusion if you're in a FigJam file and maybe you're not seeing the same things that I'm seeing. But I'm going to start a new design file. Here's my new Figma file, and you can see I have layers on the left-hand side going up and down. The toolbar is located at the top, and that goes left to right. We have the different options here, and we can toggle between different modes by clicking on these. Right now, I'm just going to stay in the design panel, and I want to just focus on making this transition from Adobe products to Figma. Some of these things will look pretty familiar, so if you want to move things around, you can use the cursor, click in here, and you can see some of the other options. You can see that this is our screen, and there's nothing in there. There's no artboard. So I think we got to get started by building frames. In this case, that's a terminology we'll use. You can see when you click on the frame button, and there's also slicing here, but the frames will pull up these presets, which are really handy to use. Social media stuff is already kind of linked in here. We're going to start with a phone. Let's say maybe the iPhone 13 Pro. And so we can click on that, and then we already have sort of the iPhone screen set up in here. You can see that added a layer in here. And so think about this as an artboard. You can see that different icon is here. If you want to change this, you can double click into it. All right, so here we have some shapes. We have rectangles. So these keyboard shortcuts are a little bit different. M is usually what you use in Illustrator, but R is for rectangle for a box. L, and you see Shift L, O, ellipse. I believe that's still the same. You can create polygon stars, and you can also bring in images. So let's maybe just start off by drawing a rectangle. If you want, again, if you want to draw a square, hold down Shift, right? So that's going to constrain it. And if you want to zoom in and zoom out, you can just do minus and plus. So those are some things to help you navigate. Also, hold down spacebar. It's the hand tool. You can move around like this. You can see whatever key I'll press is going to show up in this little window, so you can see what I'm doing. So navigating around in here. Here we go. Let's grab this shape that we drew, and again you can see the hierarchy here. This is the frame, and inside of the frame are these different shapes. So if we want to select them, we can select them like this, or select them on the board. We can change the fill by finding the color like this. You want a stroke, right now you can see that there is no stroke set up onto it. There is a fill here. You can add a stroke by hitting plus. You'll get the color, and then you'll also get, this is the stroke weight, so it could be much thicker if you want it to be. All right, we also have things like the blending modes, which are located under layer. So if you wanted to have a different blending mode, like screen or something, you can do that in here as well. So it's pretty straightforward. One other thing to talk about is if you want to round the corners out, you could click and drag and pull them here, and it's telling you the radius. You could also just go into this panel right here, and let's say you knew you needed 10 for that value. You could just write that in. Again, this is also really helpful because it shows you the X and the Y value, where this is on this frame, the width, value here. So when I use Figma, I've gotten really used to looking at these numbers, and it's helpful like if you're trying to get things to fit, within a grid, or fit exactly. Looking at these numbers is really handy. So speaking of adding a grid, if we wanted to add a grid, the way that we can do that is by clicking on the frame. You want to make sure you're on the frame itself. If you're not clicked on it, you won't see this option. Click on the frame. Let's go to Layout Grid. We can add plus, and you can see the different options. This is a grid. This is a 10 pixel grid, which might be helpful. Or we can click this button and we'll get more options. Maybe we just want columns. So we could set up the number of columns. You can change the visual styling of that. Maybe you want a gutter or maybe you don't want a gutter. In this case, you could adjust that like there. So this is the way to put in layout guides, kind of like we're used to doing in InDesign or Illustrator. Super helpful. And if you want to, you can have, one thing that you could do is have more than one of these. So maybe I have my layout columns, and maybe I want some rows as well. And these can be independent of each other. Yeah, this is how I might go ahead and do that. Again, I could click and drag and align this. I think Figma does a really good job of aligning objects to, or snapping up points, objects to the different areas and showing you the grids, the guides. I found that to be really helpful. If we keep going through the tools, we have pen. So this is just like a pen tool. You can draw stuff. This is, vector-based. You can close it off. Yeah, and if you wanted to add a fill, just add a fill like this. Oh. The other thing to keep in mind is when I'm looking at these objects, I want to see the hierarchy. Right now, this vector object is outside of the frame. You can put it inside of the frame. You saw probably one thing that happened is that by default, this frame has this clip content thing checked. So if things go outside of the frame, now I just checked it off, but so now you can see it. But if things go outside of the frame, clip content will clip that off as long as that object is underneath, inside of this. This is really important to know because sometimes people put things outside of the frame and they might not show up when they make a prototype or when they're presenting. So you got to be careful and be aware of these things right here. Before we move on to the next thing, I just wanted to show some tools up here. At the top, you can see the alignment tools and distribution tools. So these are similar to Adobe products if you want them to go to the left side, the right side, centered, and you can. So those tools will align the objects to themselves. If I wanted to center this to the frame, I can just kind of move it around and you can see the guides will show me that I'm centered there. The next tool I'm going to use is the text tool, which is pretty straightforward. We can click and drag and define an area, or we can just click and start working in it. So this is helpful if you want to create a clickable area, or if you just want to kind of plan ahead. Maybe we'll make a profile page for an app. So we'll click on that. In your options here, you can see go left, center, right aligned. We can change the size here. You could also do Command Shift period and Command Shift comma to go to, that's the keyboard shortcut to scale it up and down. You can see that effect here. Okay, so this is your profile page, and again, you can see the placement. It's the X position, the Y position, how wide it is. You might want to center it on the page. Okay, let's see. maybe we just have some placeholder text. Some lorem ipsum. And you can see like this box is going to just conform to the content, or you can resize it. So if, for example, you wanted this to be some text here, maybe this is a lot smaller. I'm not super into the size, but okay. So that's centered on the page. One thing that I think confuses people when they're working with text is, if you wanted to resize this, you might think, or scale the type, you might think you could do it this way, or hold down Option and try it. Something that works in some Adobe products. But, if you wanted to scale this, I think that you're best off doing it this way, changing the size, or using the keyboard shortcut. You could resize this by using the scale tool. So that's in here. The shortcut is K. The drawback to this is that it scales it, and you end up with some crazy decimals and fractions and things like that, which aren't great for an interactive project where you probably want to use more round numbers. So that's something to be aware of. But if you're using Figma for some other like social media graphics or things that don't need to have a precise size, that could be one way to resize the text if you have it. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is maybe add a image into here. So we can do that by placing the image from here. I have a few images that I created or that I saved. Sorry, I didn't create these. These are downloaded from Unsplash. We can click or drag. Whoops, it got really big. You can resize it this way. So if we had this profile photo, we wanted to put it here. This is one way to do it. One thing that's interesting about this is you can see what's happening is this image is basically working like a fill for the bounding box or the shape. And if you look at the right-hand side, you'll see that it is actually coming in as a fill, and it has different modes. You could do fill, fit, crop. So you could actually crop this down if you wanted to move it around like this. Tiling, which is its own thing, but there are also some options to, let's say, underexposed or overexposed. You can do some subtle correction here. You could desaturate it. Sometimes that's handy if you just want a black and white image. Okay, but this is the way images work. They come in as fills. Let's say you want to do something like a circular profile photo. One thing you could do is go and add the image. Instead of a solid color, you could go up to Options, Image. These are gradients here, so you can see the different options for a fill or for shape. We can grab that. And maybe if we set it to crop, then we can actually move this around. There we go. And so I'm going to delete this up here, but let's say I wanted a circular profile photo. Okay, so I've got that set up there. The next thing I might want to do is explore some of those the fills, the gradient fills that we looked at. So maybe we'll make a button, and to round the corners, you could just go into here, hit 5. Maybe you want like a subtle gradient on here. And we'll add like a tiny stroke. And this is a button. So you could also add, on effects, add a drop shadow. And if you can click on here, you can go in and change some of the settings. So yeah, just change the options in here, and you can change the opacity, spread, even the color of this if you wanted to. And maybe you want some text in here. Whoops, I'm inside this text box, so it wouldn't let me make its own text box. Maybe this just says button. If I select these two, I can align them to each other, and if I just want to center it, something like that. Let's say I also had another image I wanted to put in, sort of like a background image. I'm going to go into here and find that image. And there we go. Again, this is sort of, think about like as your layer palette, and the layer order matters. So if I want this to go behind everything else, I can just drag it and put it underneath it. Maybe I don't want, maybe I just want it to be behind the photo, something like this. Anyways, it's a pretty flexible program, and on the frame itself, I have a fill, a white fill, but you could go in and put a different type of fill there if you needed to. I think at this point, just thinking about these assets, if you ever need to export like different assets, let's see, I have this button here. I could export them together, click on them, and hit export. Hit the plus button. You might want to group things together. So again, think of this as your layers palette. So you could group these together and maybe just label them. But what I want to do is export this whole screen out. So what I'll do is select that one screen, and if you had multiple screens, you could select many of them. We'll go, and so I've actually added that in here. You can set the size, so sometimes you might need something at a really high resolution if it's an asset. You can go all the way up to 3x, 4x. Set the file type. It can be PNG, JPEG, SVG, or PDF. So the first two are raster images, and the second two are vector files formats. And then we can just hit this button, and I believe on the desktop app you can choose where to save it. I think if you're on the web browser, it'll save it to your downloads folder. I'll save it into this folder, and if I go to look at that file now, so here's that image that I saved out, and you can see it's a PNG format. But yeah, I have the screen, so if I want to share this with someone else, if I need it attached to an email or something, I can do that. But the other great thing about Figma is that this can be shared. You can go in here and share the link with people, and they can actually look at this file. If they have Figma and their and editing privileges, they can go and edit things in there. They can leave comments. So it's a really powerful tool. And if you're used to Adobe, you already have a good foundation, and it's a really easy transition, I think, to move over into Figma, and it opens up so many more possibilities.